wherever you go, you always see like top 10 sellers. And that's kind of, okay, so look, this is what other people are buying. So that's actually something that people want to know. So you may not be confident about your own preferences and your own choices. And this is what others are buying. So you may want to consider buying these top 3 items and so on. People all around the world care about others. People all around the world care about social proof. But you see that it's more dominant here. So that has to do with self-esteem.
こんにちは皆さん。ビジネスサクセスジャパンのポッドキャストへようこそ。Hello everyone and welcome to the Business Success Japan podcast. This is your host, Liddy Buchelman. This podcast is made for those who want to develop or strengthen the communication skills, cultural savvy, insights into current trends and conditions, and mindsets that are essential in a Japanese business environment. The helpful, practical suggestions and engaging insights offered here provide listeners with the in-depth cultural context needed to achieve their own version of success while collaborating with Japanese counterparts. In today's episode, I get to share a conversation that I had with Dr. Adam Acar. A native of Turkey, he moved to Japan from the United States 15 years ago and has since worked as a professor and in the education, innovation, and marketing sphere. He also works on 2 YouTube channels and actively contributes his expertise and insights on LinkedIn. But Dr. Acar will share much more about his experiences and research during the interview, so be sure to stick around to learn more. Before we get into the interview, I wanted to take a quick moment to highlight 3 ways you as a listener can support the podcast if you want to help keep it going. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're using, and consider leaving a review if you're on Apple Podcasts to help the podcast reach new listeners who could benefit from the information shared here. If you have a favorite episode, please go ahead and share it with a friend or colleague who you think would enjoy it. And if you would like to help make sure I stay well caffeinated enough to keep putting together these podcasts, you can also provide support at the podcast's new Ko-fi page. You can donate once or even monthly, and every little bit goes a long way. You can find the link to do so in the description of this episode. Thanks so much in advance, and let's get into today's conversation.
I'm Adam Acar. I'm originally from Turkey. I was mostly trained in the area of advertising and marketing communications, and I came to Japan around 15 years ago as a consultant and a research analyst. I did brand equity consulting for some international brands for less than 2 years, and after that, I switched back to academia. And I became an associate professor in the Kansai area, mostly teaching global business and cross-cultural communication courses. And I have left my full-time job around 2 years ago, but I'm currently a part-time college professor, actually. I currently teach part-time courses at 2 universities. And I also do some consulting, and in addition to some cross-cultural team building activities, there's one particular company located in Tokyo and Kyoto. So I'm running cross-cultural team building activities mostly for Fortune 500 companies. So the fact that I also teach MBA courses, mostly marketing strategy, business strategy, global communications. So, and also my PhD is in the area of cultural studies. So I can arrange cross-cultural team building activities for this company. But currently I'm a part-time college professor, cross-cultural team building moderator, and also I'm supervising 2 YouTube channels. One is Fan of Samurai Museum, and the other one is my last name. It's innovation and marketing strategy.
Right, and we'll be sure to link those both in the description of the episode, so you guys can definitely check it out later. But could you tell us a little bit more about why you came to Japan specifically?
Yeah, so actually I made a mistake at the airport. and I took the wrong plane. No, I'm just kidding. Well, basically, I was interning this advertising research company, and they had they just acquired a Japanese company in Japan, obviously. And so they were searching for someone who can handle with research analysis. And it was a good match for me because at that time I was doing my PhD in Connecticut. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but about 50% of the PhDs in the United States don't finish. Usually, good universities, they don't want to award you the degree right away because they want you to publish in top tier journals and they want to make sure that you get a job offer from a good university. So they keep you at the program, 5, 6, 7 years. So I finished my coursework, and at that time, I had to make a decision whether I can take this job opportunity in Japan or I stay at the school for 3 or 4 more years and try to finish my dissertation and finish the program. And I took a leap of faith. I came to Japan and took the job as a market research analyst.
So then could you tell us a little bit more about what it was like working at universities in Japan?
So when people ask me about moving to Japan or getting a job in Japan, I always give them the same answer, which is I don't care. No, that's not the answer I give. I tell them it's always case by case. It also depends. For example, there are going to be 4 main factors, whether male or female, and whether you're going to be working in the city or in the rural side. For example, if an Italian person is moving to America, so if somebody says, okay, how does it feel like, should I get a job in America? Well, where in America? What kind of job? What are your expectations? So it's not like there's no one clear answer to that. So in my case, I was working for a public university, and at a university that welcome foreign teachers. For example, there was a dozen of foreign teachers at my university, and the university was focusing on foreign studies. So I'm sure my experience was not a typical foreign person's experience at a university. So it was quite okay. And also, since I was a little bit familiar with the cultural patterns, such as like meetings are not done to make a decision, like people don't sit over there for 6 hours to make a decision. Some people sleep, some people use their laptop. So it's to we got to meet, and it's to eliminate the legal risks. So no one can say I didn't hear that. So that's why they make you come over there. And also it's to like physically being in the same room or in the same environment that to help group solidarity. And yeah, I mean, perhaps your podcast listeners would already know these kind of things. So it's not result driven. It's mostly not ritualistic, but it's just continuing the system. So it was a typical experience, but I think my university was a little bit more welcoming than other universities. So I did not have any problems at all.
It's great to hear that you've had a good experience. But many people come to Japan either as students or maybe eventually hoping to work in universities as potentially English teachers, even, or in their specialization. And just in your experience, is there anything in particular people should be aware of? Maybe apart from the orientation towards process over results. Anything else come to mind?
Well, in general, I mean, you may have experienced this before. So in general, smart people don't like generalizations because generalizations, it's like you're living out anything different from the average. And statistically speaking, 33% of all of your experiences will be different from the average. So generalizing, okay, if you come to Japan, this thing would happen, or Japanese people are like this, or Japanese universities or Japanese language schools are like this, maybe a little bit misleading. So that's why I kind of abstain from making generalizations. But in general, they should just understand that people are not driven by results only. For example, what makes me probably different from most other foreigners in Japan is I'm kind of tricultural because I'm not from a Western country. I'm originally from the Middle East. But I also lived in the United States for such a long time. My brother's also still in the US. So I can compare the culture in Turkey and the United States and Japan. Also, I taught cross-cultural communication in America to American students, and we had examples from all around the world. And one thing I remember was, so the cross-cultural communication book had examples, right? In each chapter or for each topic. But I noticed that like more than 15% of the examples were from Japan. Like even though there are 200 countries in the world, there were so many examples from Japan. So Japan is a little bit idiosyncratic. And what makes it different from most other countries is like people are not driven by results. People are not driven by financial benefits. For example, in Turkey or in the United States, so you say, let's say you're in America and you want to teach English, right? You go to Turkey and you don't have a working permit, let's say. But if you say, okay, so I'm going to teach English for 10% of the cost, okay? And for security reasons, I'm going to give you my passport. So some people may accept this because they're going to have big financial gain, right? You know, you're not technically allowed to teach, but there's going to be a financial gain. So some people may expect that in Japan, if they don't have teaching experience or if they don't have qualifications or if they, some other things, other negative points of themselves, so they may think, well, if I do it for cheaper, maybe people would choose me. Or if I, you know, provide them provide them some additional benefits. Let's say I'm an IT guy, so I will do their website for free, so they will choose me. So they may subconsciously think, so Japanese companies will have some financial benefits, so they're going to choose me. That does not happen. So they should definitely keep that in mind. People all around the world or companies all around the world may care about some short-term benefits, but in Japan, they usually don't. This also applies not only getting a job as an English teacher, this applies to doing business as well. For example, so if I build some software, or if I'm trying to, if I have SaaS product in America or in the Middle East, if I approach some companies, I say, well, it's $100 subscription per month, but I'll give you for free. Not all companies would accept, but some companies would accept because they have no risk, right? Like in marketing class, we always teach about these risks, like psychological risk, physical risk, financial risk, information risk, and so on. So, well, if it's free, I don't have much risk, right? So they try it. But in Japan, maybe you have to go to 100 companies or 500 companies to get one company tried for free. So that's the difference. So they should not think people will care about some short-term financial benefits. So they're going to collaborate because you're going to offer them some very irresistible benefits. So companies or people may not care much about it. So that's different from other countries.
Yeah, and that's one that's very easy to overlook, but is very important to keep in mind. Even if you do have what you think are the correct incentives in line, it may not work cross culturally, depending on the country that you're moving into. So, one other focus in your work has involved social media specifically. Do you have any insight into any of the ways that social media functions differently in Japan versus what people might expect from more Western cultures where most of my listeners are from?
Yeah. Well, actually, my book was about my book was about it. There are so many differences, but I think we have to distinguish between these two things. One of them is the business aspects of social media, another is individual and cultural aspects of social media. When it comes to the business aspects of social media, I always tell people this: unless you're in the beauty, health, fitness area, or unless you're in an industry that is close to impulsive buying. social media has a very low purchase influence. And if you look around, most successful startups actually are successful because of their success on Google SEO. As a matter of fact, I have never seen a successful startup that does not rank on high on Google for. I'm not talking about B2B startups. I'm talking about any kind of e-commerce, any kind of DTC, direct-to-consumer brand. I have never ever seen a DTC or e-commerce startup which is successful but which doesn't rank high on Google. And I have never ever seen an unsuccessful startups which ranks on top of Google for a very high volume keyword. So I know there's a very clear relationship between Google SEO success and business success. But I know many startups which have millions of followers on social media, but which collapse or which don't generate good cash flow. So, social media doesn't usually cause a sales spike or a sale increase. It's usually the result. First, if you're successful, you also have high social media followings, for business wise. So even though I technically wrote the first study in the world about Facebook and marketing communications, unfortunately, I recognize that it has some shortcomings and limitations unless you're a nonprofit or unless you're in the B2 or impulsive buying category. So that's the business side of it. When it comes to cross-cultural side of it, so there are so many differences. I guess it's a broad question. Like, for example, for Twitter, we noticed that most Twitter, not most, but at that time, 25% of Japanese Twitter accounts were locked, meaning you could not see the followers and whatever you post is not public, which is actually just against what Twitter stands for. This Twitter stands for like public communication. So we noticed that like 25%, and all around the world it was less than 7%. So that was very strange for us. And we also noticed that Japanese people usually don't talk much about politics, news, and sports compared to Americans. We also noticed that Japanese people usually don't post individual profile pictures. They mostly post like group photos. Yeah, there were so many differences. I have to look at my book because I got a book about it.
Right. And we'll also link to that if people are curious and want to learn more about some of those differences. But yes, that is a little bit of what I've heard in relation to how Japanese people overall tend to interact with social media is it's a little bit more anonymous. It's a little bit less involved with putting your own opinions out there, especially compared to Americans. Americans do very much love sharing their opinions.
One particular thing I may want to talk about is actually this is actually like the model or the should I say like hypothesis that I developed. So when we looked at the countries with the high levels of social media usage and low levels of social media usage, we noted that there are actually three types of countries or three types of cultures in the world. One of them is the Western countries. In these countries, people use social media a lot, but the highest levels of social media usage is actually among the countries in the Middle East and South America. And the lowest level of social media usage is in East Asia. And the only explanation was it has a lot to do with what you care about. In the West, people care more about themselves, so they post stuff, but they don't read much about the community and society. So their social media usage is average. So in the Middle East, they care a lot about what others say, but they also have high self-esteem. They also talk about themselves. So that's why they generate a lot of content and they have the highest level of usage. And in the East, they care about others, but they have low self-esteem and they don't want to bother others and they don't want to talk about themselves. And they generate less content, and that's why there's the lowest level of usage in East Asia. So that was actually the conclusion of my study based on a high volume of data.
So Were there any takeaways from what you found in your studies related to self esteem and community oriented cultures? Or is this more something that just requires more research that you're hoping to do in the future?
Well, actually, the general it's not necessarily the takeaway from my studies, but this is, I entered a graduate school 20 years ago, and in my life, I'm sure I've read at least 1,000 academic papers, and I've also authored 30, 40 academic papers. But after a few years at the graduate school, I noticed that there was one thing that was included in many different types of studies in the area of sociology, area of clinical psychology, or business, consumer behavior, advertising, and so on. And that variable was, that concept was self-esteem. Look, self-esteem could predict a lot of things, varying from your saving behavior to your reactions toward political ads, varying from whether you go to prison or whether you become a leader. So that particular variable predicted human behavior probably more than other concepts that we are aware of, probably more than your IQ or your other traits. And Japan, particularly Japanese women, ranked lowest when it comes to self-esteem. There are some studies that measured um, what they do is they ask you these self-esteem questions, and they take the average, and they take the average for each country. So they rank the countries, and Japanese women ranked at the bottom when it comes to individual self-esteem. So usually I tell my students that that's one particular thing that they should always try to improve, and they should be aware that that's one of the main things that separates them from the rest of the world, the individual self-esteem. So that's one thing that I often tell my students, because in many studies that I've conducted, self-esteem was there and it was influencing various types of behaviors.
Do you have any information on why it is that Japanese women specifically tend to have such a markedly lower self esteem on average?
Well, Japanese men also rank low. In general, when it comes to self-esteem, males rank higher than females, because this question is like, for example, so if you've never done juggling, right? Yeah, have you ever done juggling before? Juggling?
I have not, thankfully.
Okay, so if I have a group of people, like 10 males, 10 females, and if I say, okay, from now on, I'll teach you juggling, and how likely you think you can manage to do it? And most of the time, male give more positive answers. They say, well, I'm more likely to do it. Whether they can do it or not, it doesn't matter. Actually, they may suck, but they tend to have higher self-esteem, at least in the way they answer questions. So there's males in general higher, but Japanese in general low, because it's about the Japanese culture. Because Japanese culture is all about putting yourself below others. That's actually what bowing is. Like when I bow, I say, I'm below you. I don't think you're above me. I mean, I believe you're above me. I make myself lower than yourself. So Japanese culture is all about being humble and lowering yourself. And naturally, from the outside, it looks like you value yourself lower, because self-esteem means your evaluation of yourself, how much value you have, how much abilities you have. And so the language, the culture, the values tell you that other people are more valuable than you, and you have to lower yourself from others. So I think it's a little bit natural, but it's also, we have to be careful about the wording of these questions and how Japanese people respond to these surveys. So there are also other explanations as well. But one of them is obviously the culture of, like, East Asian culture, Confucianism, and the fact that hierarchy is more important than your individual goals. and the fact that other people are more important than you.
So you mentioned that you do tell your female students, especially, to do what they can to improve their self-esteem. Do you offer any specific advice in particular for them?
Well, that's a very good question. Actually, that's something that I've been working on. But in general, there are just typical exercises to make you feel better about yourself, such as, okay, remember a time that you won something, or remember a time when you helped others achieve their goals. Uh, think about a time when everybody was happy because of you, or what are you better than others. And I'm surprised, for example, like in some of my classes, I do some interview simulations. And the first question I ask is, okay, what makes you better than others? Most of my students cannot answer this question. Like, I mean, if I, okay, what makes you better than others? And they're like, and they cannot answer. And also, they don't have a clear answer, actually. I mean, they don't know what. They don't have a clear understanding of self, themselves. And they also, it's something that shocks them. They never thought about what they're better than others, or if they should be better than others. They don't have that kind of thinking. They never thought about it.
Right. Maybe other cultures you're trained a little bit more to actively compare yourself to others and place yourself in the hierarchy.
Probably, yeah. So we have to remind them what makes them worse than others, just to control them.
Yes, it's all about balance. So then, does this the difference surrounding self-esteem have any impact on buying behavior in the Japanese market? Are there any things that can be extrapolated from that particular aspect of Japanese culture in the Japanese market?
Yeah, yeah. It kind of has. For example, in Japan, wherever you go, if you go to a restaurant, if you go to a bookshop, or if you go to electronics shop, you always see like top 10 sellers, right? So in America, usually we don't. Like, some stores may have, but it's not that common. But in Japan, I noticed that this is very, very common. And that's kind of okay. So look, this is what other people are buying. So that's, something that you may want to, actually, it's something that people want to know. So you may not be confident about your own preferences and your own choices, and this is what others are buying. So you may want to consider buying these top three items and so on. And in Japan, in commercials, you also hear, okay, 우리가 number one, so number bestseller, number one seller. But you don't hear that claim that much in other countries. People all around the world care about others. People all around the world care about social proof. But you see that it's more dominant here. So that has to do with self-esteem. Because, I mean, if you're confident about your own choices, that you don't care much about others. But as a conflict, as a matter of fact, I made a video about the contrast in Japan. One of the contrasts in Japan is, so people care a lot about others' opinions. People care a lot about the bestsellers. But at the same time, when it comes to reviews, Japanese customers are more harsh. For example, if you just look at the comments that are left in English and left in Japanese, and if you take the average, you'd notice that the reviews in Japanese are lower. So, they may also be a little bit more demanding when it comes to service or when it comes to packaging. So it's just self-esteem has an impact, but at the same time, we have to understand it's not only thing. It's very complicated, and there are many other factors playing into this behavior. So it's difficult to have a linear relationship between self-esteem and person behavior. There are many other factors as well.
Right. Cultural dimensions are useful, but it's complicated. Just the culture itself is complicated, and then you're also dealing with individuals. So it's impossible to make precise predictions or completely explain any specific phenomenon. So I recently saw a comment that you made that was very interesting to me about konbini in Japan, in the Japanese snack industry specifically. Could you tell us a little bit more about what role konbini play in the snack industry?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I'm not an expert in that area, and so I just know there's so many convenience stores, as the name says, so they tend to be convenient. Um, and there's a tough competition between these, Lawson, Family Mart, Seven and I, and so on. And we know competition always breeds innovation and creativity. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but most convenies get a brand new product most once a week. So that's like convenience stores is one of the areas where you see a lot of innovation compared to, not a lot of innovation, a lot of change compared to other industries. But one thing that they can do more innovation, but they don't, is they heavily rely on these staff members. And in Tokyo, they mostly hire foreign exchange, not mostly, but they often hire foreign exchange students. And they often talk about how they cannot find enough staff members. So they can easily do like a camera monitoring without, cash registers or with automatic payment. They can easily do that. And one thing is the trust. So in other countries, or in many other countries, if you try to do it, so you know that some people will not follow the rules and they'll try to steal stuff, or they may vandalize the stores. I mean, so many things may go wrong. But you know that in Japan, it can run. So when people evaluate Japan, when people evaluate Japan's economy, this is something they don't see. This is worth more than $1 trillion. The value of trust between the two parties, between buyers and sellers, between the members of society, the fact that you can put stuff on the top of a mountain and put rice bags on the top of a mountain and just write the price, and no one steals it. They just grab the bag of rice and put the money over there. This is worth more than $1 trillion. And this is something that most foreigners cannot see, because this is what the economy is based on. And this is one of the reasons why some countries don't develop, or some countries develop very slowly. And some countries have always been developed in the past 100 years. It's the explanation is social trust. So that's very important. I know this is not related to konbinis, but I'm just trying to change topic because it's not my expertise.
No, that definitely makes a lot of sense. I didn't realize just how much that specific aspect of Japanese culture was worth in monetary terms. $1 trillion. That's pretty exceptional.
So it's just the kombini is this, like number one, trust, and number two, competition. Trust is the foundation of economy, and competition is the foundation of innovation. So that's an area that I've been closely following, and that's the area that Japan is doing well, and that's an area where we will have so many new innovations coming very soon because of the labor shortage. And actually, currently in Korea, there are many companies without the shop clerks or cash registers, like typical cash registers. Japan also will start deploying them, or Japanese convenience stores will also start deploying them very soon.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all of that takes root in Japan in the coming years.
I'm pretty sure on that. It's not the question of if, it's the question of when. So they'll soon start doing that.
Yeah, if you don't have enough people to work in your stores, there isn't a whole lot else that you can do at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you mentioned innovation a lot and why it makes Japanese konbinis so unique. But why is innovation in Japan kind of a unique thing in konbinis? Why is it a little bit more difficult to see that sort of innovation in other parts of the Japanese economy?
As I was talking about social trust and competition, one thing that's unique to Japan is the zombie companies. In 2020, Japan had the lowest levels of bankruptcies, which is held by many as the great news, but I consider it as very bad news. Why it's bad news? Because this means so many companies that should have gone bankrupt didn't go bankrupt, and so many inefficient, unproductive companies which don't feed the economy and which suck the sources from the economy are continuing their existence. And these companies do not innovate, and these companies are a threat to healthy economy. So the reason some innovation is lacking in certain industries is the presence of zombie companies. So that's the problem in Japan, and there's an explanation for that. The thing is, in Japan, you don't. I mean, you want stability and sustainability is the most important thing. So you want to sustain. So you don't want to let it go. So you don't want to see 200-year-old company collapse and people lose their jobs, because if that company collapses, 50 people will lose their jobs and 500-year-old company will disappear and will be history. So people want to protect that. People want to continue that, which is understandable, which is admirable by some people. For me, I agree with Steve Jobs. He says death is the best change agent because it gives a way to the new. So if we don't allow zombie companies to fail, we're not going to have new successful companies. So that's one of the biggest reasons why in certain areas innovations lack.
That definitely makes a lot of sense, because if all the resources, or not all the resources, if so many resources are going to companies that are so inefficient, it makes sense that there's less resources available for more innovative companies and spaces.
Exactly. But we also have to understand innovation is not a good match for sustainability. And why? Because sustainability means you pay your employees well, you pay your tax, and you share profit with the community. But if you pay your employees very little, you have more money. I mean, 99% you can put in your bank account, but 1% you can still use for innovation. So if you look at innovative companies or innovative economies, you see that so there's always a conflict between paying good wages and developing new products, because ideally we say, okay, let's pay good wages to employees, let's use a lot of money for research and development, but companies don't function that way. So and also innovation it means you always make new things, so you stop making what you have been making for the past 50 years, because you became perfect at what you have been doing for 50 years. So you know how you can produce it in the fastest time for the lowest cost, because you perfected in the past 50 years. So when you start doing something else, your costs are way higher. Your distribution is more expensive. Your marketing is more expensive. Your labor is more expensive. So actually, innovation is the opposite of efficiency. So we also have to understand these kind of things.
But it definitely makes sense that, I don't know, it almost feels mottainai to shift into something new if you've already been so good or at the very top of the specific area that you were working in. So I can see how that would make sense in a Japanese context.
Yeah, because Japanese context usually, values Kaizen. Whatever you're doing, you make it, you better, you become better at it, you perfect it. But innovation is like not necessarily Kaizen. Innovation is okay. So instead of thinking about how you can improve it, try to get the same results by making something else. For example, we always think about the future of cars. So instead of thinking about a better car, think about better mobility, like how you go from point A to point B. Henry Ford has, good saying about that. He said, if I asked people what they want, they would have told me they wanted better or faster horses. But now it's the same. If we ask people how, like, they want to go, like, how they can go from point A to point B, they probably tell us better cars. But we have to think about mobility, not just cars or motorcycles.
So then, in your long experience living and working and studying and teaching in Japan, do you have an example that comes to mind of a communication breakdown that you think was due to differences in culture?
So at the beginning of this podcast, we have a communication breakdown, but it was because of the speaker. So I know that was not the cross-cultural communication because it was maybe cross-technical communication. So it's mostly related to, I mean, the ones that I experienced is like the companies that I advised. Sometimes they outsource the job to overseas companies or to overseas suppliers. And the most common problem is when a person, a technical person or a supplier overseas makes a mistake, he or she does not apologize. And Japanese staff are always shocked. They're like, okay, why doesn't this person apologize? Because it was a very big mistake. And in certain cultures, I mean, I don't want to give that a specific name, but in certain cultures, it's the opposite because if you apologize, you show that you're weak, you show that you make a mistake, and that means your value will go down. And next time when you negotiate a price, you don't have the upper hand. So they definitely stay away from apologizing as much as possible. And Japanese, even if there's a very small mistake, they definitely want to hear that I'm sorry or read that I'm sorry, I apologize. And they're always like almost shocked, like why this person doesn't apologize. That was a very big mistake. But so that's something that I observed quite commonly in Japan. And also, something that surprised me is some people don't seem to understand cultural values in Japan, and they think whatever that works overseas will work in Japan. Um, so, like about 12 years ago, there was a book overseas called Free, The Power of Free. And that was one of the best sellers overseas. And one bookstore, perhaps thinking that, okay, this was a bestseller overseas, so this can sell well in Japan, they were promoting it in front of like they had a special section, there were big posters and so on. And I said, well, there's buy one get one free in Turkey, there's buy one get one free in America, there's buy one get one free in France, but in Japan I didn't see it. Like if it's free or if it's half price, they think it's either low quality or they think there's something like a string attached or there's something going on. So they would be surprised. But so they don't understand these kind of things. For instance, like now Daniel Pink has a book about regret, but in Zen philosophy, you don't regret things. Zen philosophy is all about not regretting it. So expecting that Japanese people will like whatever sells well overseas is a naive behavior that I commonly see even among foreigners who have been here for more than 15, 20 years. So we have to realize that. So the cultural dynamics are different here. So that's something I often see here.
So, if you were speaking with someone who was going to Japan for business and they only had time to learn one thing about the country or its culture ahead of time, what would you choose to teach them?
Yeah, so that's definitely not regret. So I lived here for more than like 15 years. And this is the word that I think it's called kyokai. So this is a word that I almost never hear. So they should learn probably like two things, have to apologize, like gomennasai. That was actually the first word my daughter said. She was going to work in, and the first word my daughter said, gomennasai. I mean, she was stepping on my foot. No. I mean, like the first word she literally said was gomennasai. So they should, and also one thing is, if you go to America, you often hear that people always say like amazing or great, and most people think it's so cheesy, like it sounds not so natural or not so smart. But but in reality, complimenting things around you, complimenting people around you, is always a good thing. And if you like before, like when you're coming to Japan, if you're complimenting a person that you're going to interview with, or if you're a business person that you're going to be meeting with, or complimenting the company they're working for, it's always a good thing. People always like it. And these kind of things are actually universal. Like we often tend to undervalue the importance of universal communication rules, such as the importance of smiling, importance of not criticizing things around you, importance of showing facial expressions and emotions. But the universal rules of business don't change much. And if they are a good communicator in their own culture, I guarantee that they're going to be a good communicator over here. The only thing they have to be aware of is things just move more slowly, and people are not so much worried about short-term benefits and short-term gains. So that's the only thing that they should know about.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And yes, if you could only learn one Japanese word, definitely learn sumimasen. That's a good one.
Sumimasen, and I don't think it's a bad thing to say sugoi, which is great. I mean, I guarantee if you compliment people around you, they compliment the companies that you're working with, people will love it.
Definitely. So thank you so much for sharing your time today and being so generous with it. But is there anything that we missed or that you wish that we had talked a little bit more about in today's conversation?
Yeah, so, well, I will talk about Zen martial arts and samurai and ninja culture on the Fan of Samurai Museum YouTube channel. And I often talk about innovation, creativity, digital marketing, and branding on Dr. Akar's YouTube channel. So I hope to see if some of your podcast listeners are interested in these topics. So my channel may not be as fun as yours because you have very eloquent way of presenting things with very interesting guests. But every week I personally talk about different topics if they're interested.
I'm familiar with your professor channel, and there's definitely very good and very interesting content there that people should check out. But I'm not as familiar with your other
Is it really
channel.
my channel? Are you sure it's my channel?
I am not familiar with your other channel yet, so I'll be sure to check that out. But we'll be sure to link both. And so be sure to check those out after listening to today's conversation. And thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity and good luck.
I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation. If you would like to learn more about Dr. Adam Acar, his work, or check out his YouTube channels, be sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please go ahead and share it with a friend, colleague, or on LinkedIn to help spread the perspectives and information shared on the podcast. And please remember to go ahead and subscribe or follow on whatever platform you're using, and also leave a rating and review if you enjoyed the podcast. If you would like to support the podcast, please check out the link to the show's Ko-fi page to keep me well caffeinated and making content. As always, feel free to email me at businesssuccessjapan@gmail.com if you have any other questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes or interview topics. I'd love to hear from you directly, so if you'd like to leave a voice message, you can find the link to do that in the description as well. But for now, remember that the more you learn, the more confident you will become as you explore all of the opportunities Japan has to offer you. Until next time, mata kondo.